right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, nationwide. Welcome to Unit 8 of TP701. I trust all the other PGCE students, whether they're sitting at home or on one of the campuses or the learning centres, you are welcome to engage with our topic today. All right, so some of you are practicing teachers and some of you are really student teachers in PGCE. So there's quite a variety of experience within our group. So I'm sure those of you that are practicing teachers will agree with me. Lesson planning is core to the work of a teacher, right? Because if you want to deliver quality teaching, then you have to start with your lesson planning. That is core to the work of a teacher. Right, so what we are going to do today is really, I'm going to provide you with brush strokes of certain key topics within lesson planning. But please keep in mind, you may also do lesson planning in your subject specializations. Don't see it as an overlap. See it as I will use all the information that I get from all the lecturers so that I become very skilled and knowledgeable about what is lesson planning, why do I need to do lesson planning, how can I do it, how can I design a lesson plan format for myself that I can use now but also in the future. All right, so we are going to look at the value of lesson planning. We look at a generic lesson plan that I've designed for TP701 that you can use if you want to, and I'll talk to you about that as we progress through the session. But we also stand still at the designing of lesson objectives. That is an issue that students and even practicing teachers sometimes struggle with. Then also we look at Bloom's taxonomy of learning, as well as how can we do or engage in constructive alignment when we engage in lesson planning. So I do hope that, for the practicing teachers that you will learn a little bit extra, but at any time, if you want to come in and say, this is what I do, or I'll give you some opportunity towards the end. This is what I do for lesson planning, and this is what works for me. By doing that, we are collectively sharing our ideas around lesson planning. Okay, so a key reading for this unit is your prescribed textbook, Help, I'm a Student Teacher. There's a lovely chapter 7, and I'm going to touch on it as we go through this session. All right, so there is a simile that says lesson planning is like a vehicle that supports learners on their journey to reach a predetermined destination. Right. So now look at that very carefully. Lesson planning is like a vehicle. Now you'll see I've put pictures of different vehicles. I've got a nice Porsche or a sports car that obviously very luxurious and can drive very fast. I have a very older model of a car, and then there's a truck. Right. Now if you look at them, they're all made from different parts, different components. So the wheels are different, the texture of the body is different, the steering wheel is different, but yet, if you combine all the parts appropriately, it should be functional and it should move forward. So why am I using this example? I want you to think for a moment, if you plan to go on a journey from Durban to Johannesburg, from Johannesburg to Durban, it doesn't matter where you go. There's always certain things that you keep in mind on your journey. Obviously, you ask, what is your destination, right? So if you're traveling to, say, from Durban to Johannesburg, your destination will be Johannesburg. You will ask yourself, how will I get there? So your vehicle will tell you how you will get there, but also the purpose of why you are taking this journey. If you're just going on a nice cruise and you're a bachelor, for example, you'll go on your motorbike, but you're going to stop at different points on your journey because the purpose is different. It's more for your own luxury, etc. But if you are going with your family, what you're doing along your journey is going to be completely different from when you're going on the motorbike. Right. So you ask yourself, where am I going? How am I going to get there? Why am I going there? What will I do to keep my direction? So often how do we keep direction when we go on our journey? We look at signboards, we look at our GPS. So similar in lesson planning, you always have to look at or include signboards on how you're going to ensure that your learners are also with you on this journey to the predetermined destination. Remember, the predetermined destination when you're teaching, it will be your learning objectives and your assessment. So your learning objectives is provide you with a purpose of what you are going to do in the lesson and what your learners should be able to do by the end of the learning experience. And that is supported by assessment. All right. So when you go on your journey as well, you've got all of these signposts to check, am I on the right direction? Have I gone off route, etc. When you arrive at your destination, you also have to say, how do I know I got to my destination as planned? And that is where reflection comes in. Most of you, when you've gone on a journey, you would reflect, wow, I've really done a good journey. My family was happy. We stopped at the restaurant. We had food, etc. So you do reflect, even if you just go on a journey from here to Johannesburg or Johannesburg to Durban, doesn't matter where you go. So similarly, it is with the lesson plan. The simile of lesson planning as a journey is there so that you can understand that lesson plans will differ. The format will differ, how you design it will be different. But what you need to keep in mind is, what is my destination? Where am I going? Why am I going there? How will I make sure I get there? And then to reflect on it as well. All right, so why plan a lesson? Right, now it sounds like a silly question, but I've put this cartoon in there. I finish a lesson with a sigh. Disaster, almost from the start. It seemed so promising during the 45 seconds I spent planning. Right, so why I'm putting this there is your lesson presentation really depends a lot on the 3 C's, as pointed out by Du Toit in our prescribed textbook, chapter 7, page 141. It's about how much commitment you as a teacher put into your lesson planning. Have you researched the content of your topic? Because you need to know a lot more than what your learners know. And part of lesson planning and why you should be doing lesson planning is really about understanding the context within which you teach. So in a previous session, we spoke a lot about context and what context entails. But context, you understand the physical and material resources in your class, your learners, the space that you have to work in. So all of those factors need to be considered when you sit down to plan a lesson or a series of lessons. I always say to student teachers, and remember for me, even if you're a practicing teacher, you're still going to have to be assessed by a mentor teacher who may be your HOD or the principal. And it is quite stressful because now you are going to be assessed by another person and you're given a mark for your attempt. And I always say, to offer a very good lesson presentation starts with planning 150%, not just 100%. Doing research, making sure your topic is age appropriate and phase appropriate. Making sure that you have got plan B in mind. When I say plan B, it means you've got this beautiful PowerPoint that you want to use on the interactive smartboard, but suddenly the school has load shedding. Then what? You can't say, sorry, I can't teach the lesson. You have to have plan B in mind. Whether you may have printed your notes before the time and you can still use your lovely personality, your subject knowledge, your passion, and still deliver a fantastic lesson. All right. So I just want you to think for a moment, how do you know, think back to when you were at school, how do you know a teacher was not prepared? I know what my teachers did. They came into the class, sat down, and they say, open your textbook on page 20 and start with activity 5. Isn't that so? Right. Or the teacher would say, I haven't got time to teach you now. Just read through the textbook. I have to quickly go speak to Mrs. Joe outside. And off they go. Right. So there's various ways that one can determine when a person or a teacher is not prepared for a lesson. So there's a lot of value in lesson planning for a practicing teacher, for a lecturer, for a student teacher. For me, what stands out, if you look at these items on, or these points on the slides, is specifically number 3. If you are well prepared, you have really taken careful consideration of your content, the activities, your strategies, whether you are using group work, role play, demonstration, cooperative learning. It doesn't matter what strategies you use. You have determined your resources, you've determined the context within which you are working. It will give you confidence. So for me, proper and effective planning gives a teacher confidence. Confidence to know I am the master of the content, I understand what's going on, and if there is a problem in my class, I can immediately adapt my strategy, my instructions to suit the needs of my learners. Right, but effective or really taking time to engage in lesson planning also allows you to come up with creative ideas, very creative ideas. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I always say, our learners in our schools today, this generation, they love watching movies and TV and playing games. So you have to almost be like that person on a game, that person on TV. So you have to be really, really, and I wouldn't say an extrovert, you don't necessarily have to be an extrovert, but you really have to entertain your learners. And part of entertainment means originality, creativity, but also variety. You must ensure that you've got variety. Don't just have one type of teaching approach like questioning or just discussion. Vary your approaches as much as you possibly can, but without losing the focus and the process of your lesson plan. So for me, it's about variety, creativity, and innovative ideas. Right. We also say that effective lesson planning will help you to actually to manage constraints while you are teaching. If you really thoroughly prepared your lesson, you will be able to, before the time, say, well, you know what, I don't have enough resources. Maybe I should ask my learners to bring up some resources, or you could have asked the teacher next to you. But learning effective planning also ensures that you have to understand the learner's concentration spans. You know, they say learners in high school should be able to concentrate for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. Sometimes I think it's 5 minutes these days, right? And that's why I say variety is key. Variety is key. Change your strategies as you go along, right? But it's also about time management and also to keep your learners interested. We've spoken about that. And then you will learn in education studies about scaffolding. But part of our lesson planning allows you to say, okay, if I have a very complex task that my learners have to do, how will I make sure that I provide step-by-step activities and explanation or discussion for them to be able to do that activity and that task? Right, so you can see there's a lot of advantages to lesson planning, but for me that gives you confidence, really confident. You know what you're doing, when you're doing it, why you're doing it. Right, so in our prescribed textbook in chapter 7, you will see that the authors there talk about the lesson structure, but in a way it's like a lesson process. There is the pre-interactive phase. That is your planning, and that is what you're going to be working with now for assignment 3. And when you are in your 3-week teaching practice block, you have to design lesson plans. And there's quite a lot of features, let's call them features, items, components that you need to keep in mind when you plan your lesson. Whether you use the example I'm going to show you today, or maybe your school has got an example of a lesson plan, or you've designed your own, it doesn't matter, as long as those core components are there. You'll see in the pre-interactive phase, we look at routine information, selecting your topic, the content area, the time duration of your lesson, that you will get from your curriculum documents. So the curriculum documents will help you with that, whether you're using Cambridge, IIB, CAPS documents, it doesn't matter. From there, once you've selected your topic content area, you start designing your lesson objectives or your learning objectives. But you also have to determine the prior knowledge of the learners, the prior learning. What have they done on this topic before? It could be the year before, it could be 2 years before, it could be a week before, it could be just drawing from their life world, right? Okay, and I'll give you some examples as we go along. It's about also planning activities for the intro, the development, and the consolidation, which is your presentation. And then also to select and design your resources, design your planned questions, because we don't just walk into a class and the questions just pop into our mind. There's always planned questions. Yes, once you start teaching, often you have questions that just come on board, but it's good to always plan your questions. So that's why we look at Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And then also to determine your assessment as well. If you have done your planning thoroughly, you go into your interactive phase, which is your presentation. And then the authors of Help I'm a Student Teacher also talks about the post-interactive phase, which is reflection, looking back. Now, we have covered being a reflective practitioner in one of our previous units, but remember, you are also going to reflect on every lesson that you teach. That is how you learn the skill of reflecting. So there's a very easy way also to understand reflection. They say reflection is almost like a traffic light or a robot. The green is achievements. I can do this, and I must keep on doing this. Always like the yellow or orange. I've got some challenges and weaknesses. I'm getting there, but I still need to do a little bit more or read up a little bit more, get some more support. Or the red, I need help. This didn't work. I need really great improvements in this area. All right. So it's important for any teacher or student teacher to reflect on every lesson that they teach. And remember, one lesson can be wonderful in grade 9A. You go teach the exact same lesson to grade 9B, and it's a complete disaster because it's the same lesson, but the dynamics in the classroom is different. The learners are different. And that is where you've got to look at what is it that I can change from one class to the next. All right. So let's stand still at some of these planning issues. All right. Our prescribed textbook, the authors Dutoit et al. Says, lessons do not necessarily follow the same pattern, and no lesson is more superior to another. So the structure of the lesson plan can differ, and it will differ, because it depends on your subject. If you are teaching a science lesson and you are using a demonstration in a laboratory, it's going to be the format and the way you design your lesson. It's going to be completely different from teaching a history lesson, for example, where you're focusing on a lot of content. Right. So the way that you design the lesson and the structure, what you put in that lesson, will differ from subject, the type of learning that you would like to engage in, and then also the context that you are teaching in. As you gain more experience throughout this PGCE program and sharing ideas with each other, you will start developing your own way of developing your lesson plans. However, I'm going to take you through the generic lesson plan that I've put on ECI, and it really goes with the information that's in chapter 7 of our prescribed book. You will see the first part is really a lot of routine information, including the topic, the focus area, the grade, the time duration of the lesson, the CAPS page number. What we want you to do in the PGCE is that for your lessons that you put in your portfolio of evidence, we would like you to actually make a copy of the CAPS page document or your curriculum that you are working with. It may be an annual teaching plan, it may be a program of work, and highlight, I am today looking at water pollution, so that when the assessor sees you, whether it's us in the second semester or your mentor, they know exactly where you are. And when we take your portfolio of evidence, we can see that you have clearly linked the curriculum content with your lesson plan. You will notice if you go through your lesson assessment form that's on ECI, there is a criteria that says, is there a link between the curriculum and the content, the core content in your lesson plan? Now remember, core content is knowledge and skills and values and attitudes, right? Okay, so if we go down to the next part, you'll see there's a block for prior learning. You have to think of what have the learners done around this topic before this session. And you can either look at the CAPS document, you can ask the mentor teacher, they can also help you with that, because you cannot assume that the learners don't know anything about the topic. They would have covered it, they could have covered it somewhere in the curriculum or their own life world. Right. I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say you are doing a topic on the rainforests, right? Now, you don't know, I'm sure most learners in your class haven't gone to a rainforest. Maybe they've read up a little bit about it. They know basic stuff about it. So one could then, for example, say under prior knowledge, they have a basic understanding of what a rainforests are from their own life world, but they've not covered it anywhere in the curriculum prior to this day. Right. Okay. You don't have to put it exactly in that, but I think you understand my message there. All right. Then we've got the learning objectives or outcomes, which I will go through with you now. And you'll see that there's 3 categories of learning objectives: your knowledge, your skills, and your values or attitudes. And please look how we start our learning objectives. By the end of the lesson or the learning experience, the learners should be able to. And then I will give you some examples. Assessment. Assessment is always linked to your objectives. It's important that you identify what you are assessing, how you are assessing, who will be doing the assessment, what rubrics or tools will you use, assessment tools will you use. Don't just say, I'm marking a worksheet. It's formal assessment. It's a worksheet on the causes of pollution. It's 50 marks. And it will be marked by the teacher. Because remember, you have peer assessment, self-assessment, group assessment, teacher assessment. So there's a whole variety of assessment strategies. So be specific about the type of assessment you are using, the what, the how, and the who and the who and the how. Resources. There you list the resources that you are going to use in your lesson. Right? Could be objects, posters, charts. Some schools still use OHP transparencies. Could be popular media like newspapers and magazines. It could be your interactive smartboard. It could be YouTube videos, etc. And then your lesson phases. In your lesson phases, you outline what are you going to do in the introduction, the development, and the conclusion. And normally what we do there is you write the core content, the activities as well as the approaches. Remember, when we talk about approaches or methods, it will be like group work, cooperative learning, role play, etc. There's quite a lot of teaching approaches that you can look up. Then you have your planned questions using these 6 levels of questioning of Bloom, and we will go through that in a moment. Then you've got homework and independent work, and then learners needing special attention. References, because we want you to reference any material that you have used in preparation for the lesson. Please do not just say CAPS document. You have to reference it properly, whether you use Harvard or I think we are currently using the Harvard system. Don't just put their YouTube, reference it properly, and don't put Pinterest, reference it properly. So it's important to do the referencing properly. And then we've got self-reflection on achievements, challenges, and improvements. But again, you can see there, identify the achievements, for example, and justify. Why do you see them as achievements? You could say my lesson went very well because the resources I had really enhanced the learner's understanding, and that's justification. Okay, so let me just see if I can get back to, now our technical guy has gone out. Okay, we're back online. All right. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is important when you do lesson planning is that there's got to be constructive alignment. So there's got to be a link, a clear link between your learning objectives or outcomes, your assessment, and the activities that you have in your class or in your lesson. And I'll give you an example as we go along. So that, for me, is key to a successful lesson. Often we get students saying, my learners are going to design, at the end of the lesson, learners will be able to design a poster on water pollution. But nowhere in the lesson is there an activity or an instruction that says they must actually go and design a poster. So then why have that learning objective? So there's got to be this clear alignment between your objectives, your assessment, as well as your teaching and learning activities. Right. Going forward to looking at the domains of learning. Right. You may also come across this in your other specializations, because the domains of learning is very popular and very important for any teacher. These domains or levels of learning help you not only with writing learning objectives, they will also help you with designing assessment tasks, with designing questions, whether it's verbal questions that you ask in the classroom, or it's written questions in a worksheet, a test, an exam. So, and that is why Bloom's taxonomy, any of the taxonomies of learning really have great value. So, in educational terms, Bloom is very popular. Now, Bloom was an educational theorist from 1956. Can you see in 1956, which many, many years ago. However, his work developed and he drew on other people's work like Krathval and Dave. And what is very important here, you would see that the 3 domains of learning is your cognitive domain. So there's your mental skills, the knowledge that you develop, what we know. There's your psychomotor domain. So your manual or physical skills, how we do. So basically how we do, right? And then your affective, which is your growth in feelings or emotions, which is your attitude. So in general terms, and if you look at some of the pictures around the domains, they say it's about the head, the heart, and the hands. That's a very simplistic way of remembering. The head, the heart, and the hands, right? And that is what we should be doing in each of our lessons that we present. We should be developing knowledge, skills, as well as values and attitudes, because that contributes to the holistic development of the learner. Right, we're not going to go into too much detail in the psychomotor and the affective. I'll just give you examples, but you can read in chapter 7 of our prescribed textbook more about the psychomotor and the affective. There's some lovely examples there as well. I'm going to give you these examples to show you how you could identify the learning objectives used based on the 3 learning domains. For example, learners should be able to identify different types of pollution and design a plan of action to reduce pollution in the atmosphere. So that is your cognitive, right? Your cognitive. But if you creating means there's a skill involved. Create a digital poster on the effects of pollution on the state and the health of mankind. So your psychomotor, P stands for psychomotor. But to develop it further into the affective, the learners should be able to develop an awareness around global warming. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, in each of these learning objectives, there's an action verb. Identify, design, create, develop. Right. So when you write your learning objectives, you need to always make sure that you have an action verb. Because if you write an action verb, you can measure or test it. Right. For example, if I say to you, identify different types of pollution, and you say to me, water pollution, air pollution, sea pollution, whatever it is, you can identify, right? So I can see that you can do it, right? So that is why we use action verbs when we design our learning objectives. Right, so where do you get these learning objectives from? The CAPS or your curriculum documents will normally guide you. So once you've selected your topic from your CAPS document for your subject and for the term and the grade, you will see there are lots of action verbs in the CAPS document or in your curriculum documents that will guide you on how to write your learning objectives. You design them based on what you want your learners to achieve in that specific lesson, right? When we've spoken about the action verbs, please do not use words such as learn, understand, and know. Because if I say to you, do you understand what water pollution means? Some of you will say yes, and some of you will say no, and some of you will say sort of. Right. So how would I measure that? The best would be for me to say, okay, name the different types of pollution. Then I can actually see and measure whether you do understand. Right. Make sure that your objectives are achievable. So do not list too many. Don't go and write 10 objectives, because you won't, your learners will not be able to achieve it in that period of time. Often students say to us, how many objectives should we have for a lesson? It's very difficult to say because it depends on the topic. It depends on what the learners must achieve. It could happen that you have 3, it could happen that you have 6, but normally we say to our student teachers to get used to the writing of learning objectives. Maybe it would be best to have 2 knowledge, 2 or 3 knowledge, 2 or 3 skills, and maybe 1 or 2 attitudes and values. I just want to tell you at this point in time, writing learning objectives for values or attitudes is very difficult. It is very difficult. And the other thing about it is it's very difficult to measure or test. Let me give you an example. If I'm doing a lesson on pollution, and in the lesson, I kept on saying to the students, we mustn't pollute, it's very bad for the environment and for mankind. The learners do activities, but when they walk out of the door, what happens? They throw papers on the floor. And then when you speak to a student, they say, no, but I'm creating employment. Right. So what I'm just saying to you is, how do you measure values and attitudes? You're hoping that you're making the learners aware of global warming. You're hoping that you're making them aware of not polluting. But it's very difficult to actually assess. And you will see this statement also in our chapter 7 of our prescribed textbook. Right. Please, if you're a mathematics teacher, do not write under values, my learners will develop a love for maths. Because how will you test or measure that? And we have a lot of students that do that. They say, my learners will develop a love for maths. Okay. Let's look at Bloom's taxonomy. Oh, there are so many diagrams on Bloom's taxonomy. Now, this is the revised taxonomy, because Bloom had a taxonomy, but then one of his students, she actually said, no, let's revise it so that it is more 21st century and it makes more sense for various reasons. We won't go into the history around that. Now, remember what I said to you? Bloom's taxonomy is very valuable for teachers because it helps you to design learning objectives, helps you to design questions, and it helps you to design assessment activities at different levels. Right. So remember, taxonomy means it's like a classification, right? It's a classification, and it takes you from a lower level right up to a higher level. So the previous, when Bloom brought out his taxonomy, he spoke about lower order levels of thinking, middle order levels of thinking, and higher order levels of thinking. Right. But often, for you to be able to get to your higher order, you have to have a command of the lower order. Right, so let's briefly look at each of them. Your very lowest order of thinking would be that of, or lowest level of thinking, would that be that of remembering, right? Just remembering, so you recall facts and basic concepts. And there's some action verbs, you'll see there's some action verbs that you can use when you design questions or learning objectives or assessment around just basic remembering. At this point, I just want to say to you, there are many websites where you can actually find a list of verbs that you can use that can help you with designing the different levels. Then let's understand. So to be able to explain ideas or concepts, to apply, remember when you apply something, you take something that you have learned or that you know about and you apply it to a new situation or a different type of situation. Your analysis, when you're able to draw connections among ideas. Often when your teachers say to you, analyze this map, analyze this picture, that is what you are doing. You are taking it apart and you are looking at the different components of that item or that object or whatever you are busy with. Right, so you'll see the words such as compare, differentiate, contrast. Okay. Then we have evaluate. We're moving now really into the higher order level of thinking. Your evaluate means when you justify a decision. You really, it's your voice, it's your opinion, you argue, you defend, you judge, you critique. Right. So I just want to say at this point, designing evaluation questions is quite difficult. Often a student will say, we'll design a question, for example, where they say, the coronavirus is going to kill all the people in the world. Yes or no? And stop there. Without saying justification. If you had to rephrase it as evaluate, you would make a statement, the coronavirus is going to kill all the people in the world. Do you agree with the statement or you don't agree? Justify your response. Can you see that justification? Often we get people writing a question saying it's evaluation, but they haven't asked for justification or to critique that specific statement that they've made. Then we have create. Right, create is to produce a new or original piece of work. So when you design a poster, when you really develop, when you author, when you investigate, it's really that higher order thinking of designing something. And that brings us to the issue, the high level of creating. In the previous Bloom's taxonomy, they referred to it as synthesis, right, to create something new, right. So if we had a lot more time, we would have some practical activities around it, but I will put some more activities for you on ECI around this. Okay, so let's look at an example. When you, part of your planning, lesson planning, and to make sure that you have constructive alignment in your lesson planning, take a piece of paper. When you do your planning, write your objectives, your learning objectives, and then next to it, write what activities are you going to use to actually develop those objectives, and what assessment will you use. All right. So, for example, this is very basic ideas, a very basic example. If you want learners, so the topic is advertisements for grade 7, and you say you would like the learners to be able to distinguish between different kinds of advertisements. So what activity will you use? You will let your learners in groups select different kinds of ads from newspapers or magazines or from Google News, cut them out, paste them on poster paper or design a digital document, and then they must distinguish between the different kinds of ads. How will you assess? It will be informal observation-based assessment. You are observing whether they're on track and they can follow instructions and they are on task. Right. Let's go to the next one. Learners must be able to or will be able to explain the use of the ADA technique in advertising. ADA stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. So they've got to select one ad from their selection. You see the activity 1, and then explain how the ADA technique was used to design that advertisement. Then you want them to write a classified advertisement that meets specific requirements. So it must be a certain type of words, certain length. So then you ask them to write a classified ad for the perfect teacher, if you want to do creative writing, or maybe for a job, specific type of job description. How will you assess? You will ask peers to assess. And because that's group work, you will ask peer assessment, and it's informal. The peers are not going to give a mark, but they will give comments to the other group. Could be peer or group assessment. And then last of all, you want your learners to design a display advertisement for a product of their choice. And they will do that using the ADA technique, and you as teacher will individually assess each individual learner's work using a rubric. There's 30 marks to it, so it's a formal assessment. Can you see that alignment, right? Your objective, your activities, and your assessment. What you can also do to add another layer to it on the side, make another column for your resources. What resources do you need? Do you have to make it? Must the learners bring it? Is it available in your classroom? Okay, so please make sure that you understand assessment terminology. There's quite a lot of confusion in the material around assessment terminology. So just for our PGCE, to make it more clear, there are forms of assessment. Could be informal, formal, summative, formative assessment. You have assessment approaches or assessment methods, and there's a variety of those. And you also have assessment tools, such as, for example, a rubric, an analytical rubric, or a holistic rubric, observation schedule, investigation schedule, worksheet. Can you see those? Right. So when you, on your lesson plan, identify whether you are, it's formal assessment, informal assessment, whether it's peer assessment, self-assessment, and you can find a lot of information in your curriculum documents. There's an entire section there that talks about assessment. But there's also a chapter in our prescribed book that you should read through when you start with your lesson planning on assessment. I think it's chapter 5 or 6. Okay, assessment tools. Most textbooks have assessment tools that supports the topics, but you can also design your own assessment tools. In your methodology, your subject methodologies, I've seen some tasks there where you will design your own type of assessment tools, and you have to get experience in doing that. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've got about 10 minutes or 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay. When you plan for your introduction is really getting the attention of your learners. I always call it the wow experience. It must be wow. I want to know more. So the learners must have this feeling, wow, this is exciting. I want to learn more. I want to know more about this topic. Right. Do not start your lesson, especially when you're a student teaching. Do not start your lesson with open your textbook on page 5. Let's look at, oh, you've lost the interest of the learners immediately. All right. You can think of creative introductions like this. You don't have to have amazing resources for introductions. All right. Okay. I want to give you, I'm running out of time for examples. All right. So what you need to do is you can start with, for example, a demonstration. You can start with newspaper articles, stories. There's such a lot of things you can do. One of my students I saw yesterday for an assessment in a primary school, she was teaching grade 5 about capacity and volume. And she started her lesson by asking them, what is the difference between what is capacity and volume, and why is it so important in life to know about capacity and volume? And they must give examples. So, and then she went on from there to say, what is the purpose of today's lesson? So can you see immediately what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And it's very important in today's life to gain the attention of the learners, to tell them why are they doing something. Why are you doing this? How is it going to help you in your life, going now or going forward? If you can get that right, if the learners can understand why they are doing something, the purpose of it, you have really gained a lot. You don't have to have all the answers. You can ask them also, why do they think this topic is so important for them? Right. So then we move on to our development part. Now, a lot of recent research has moved away from the notion of this is the development phase of the lesson. They call it more the facilitation phase, because the teacher sets up opportunities and activities for the learners to work through materials on their own, and the teacher just facilitates. The teacher moves around from group to group and facilitates the actual activities. Right, but what is important in this phase is creating those opportunities where they can discover and the core content and link it to real life situations. But you also need to monitor your learners' understanding. Remember, we said if you take this road trip, you take this journey, to know that you're on the right track with directions or your GPS. You have to have like a GPS in your lesson as well. How are you going to keep on making sure that the learners are on the right track? And we can do that through questioning. Oh, I love questioning. I think you can have the most amazing lesson through questioning, because it also allows you to interact with your learners. But then also assessment, and that assessment can be quick 5-minute assessment, little tasks that they do, or it can be just your informal observation assessment where you make sure that they're on track. Right. Your consolidation, how you end your lesson. They say a good lesson should never end by bell ringing and you haven't finished your lesson. There should be consolidation part where you check whether the learners have really understood what happened in the lesson, the content, the skills. And of course, that can happen in many ways. What I found very valuable when I was teaching was a very nice way of consolidating is I would ask my learners, what did you learn today? So let me see, can I have Mr. Goldstone? Would you mind you just coming, or can I move away from the camera? Can I move away? All right. If I have to ask you, what did you learn today?
I learned the value of successful lesson planning.
Okay, great. Learned the value of lesson planning. What did you learn today?
How important it is to assess learners to see whether they have really understood the objectives.
Okay, how important it is to assess learners? Let me ask you.
I learned that it's good to adapt to real life.
Aha, can you see? Now, what happened now? You have actually summarized the key concepts or the content that we have covered. So can you see how easy it is to bring or think about different strategies to consolidate? A lot of teachers consolidate by asking the learners to do homework or to do a worksheet, but there are so many other different ways. Okay, just to finish off, I have like 15 seconds. Well, my PowerPoint just disappeared. Just to remind you, when you do your 3-week block of teaching practice, or it depends on where you are in the system. When I say in the systems, you're doing TP at different points in time or different places. Remember the criteria or the requirements for TP701 is that you have to teach 4 formal lessons. 4 formal lessons. Okay, I'm not moving. There is another slide after this. Okay, it's fine, not to worry. You need to teach 4 formal lessons for your mentor teacher on the prescribed form. And then there are 6 informal lessons where you plan, you present, but your teacher will not use the prescribed form. They will give you verbal feedback, or they may write you a little letter at the end of your lesson plan. Right. Please keep in mind your 3 weeks is very tight. Your 3 weeks are very tight. In your week 1, I would advise you for your planning to do 2 informal lessons so that you get used to your learners. When I say 2 informal, so if you've got two specialization, it's 1 in each specialization. If you've got 1 specialization, do both in that one. If you've got 3 specializations, choose which of the specializations. But there should be a balance overall. Then in week 2, I would recommend that you do 2 formal and 2 informal, and week 3, 2 formal and 2 informal. And in that way, you can cover your lesson plans, right? Okay. I want to come back to one last point. You know, a lot of South Africa has embarked on inclusive education, which means you will have learners in your class that need special attention. I think in some schools, every learner needs special attention, right? But when we say a learner that needs special attention, it could be a learner that's got visual impairments, hearing impairments, some form of learning impairment. You need to identify those learners, because part of developing as a student teacher is to say, I have a learner in my class that is dyslexic, right? How will you accommodate that learner in your topic in your classroom? If a learner's got a visual impairment, for example, and you're doing a demonstration, you can't let the learner sit at the back. You will call the learner to the front to sit there so that they can see. So how will you know, especially if you're a student teacher, ask your mentor teacher to give you some information about the learners in your class so that you can identify learners needing special attention. It's important that you think about it, not only what is the issue, when I say the issue, what is the impairment, or what is the identify the special need, and then how will you accommodate that learner. All right. Okay, I have 54 seconds for questions. We have one question from us.
My question is on lesson plans. I have an AFL books my mentor teacher recommended I look at. There's no first home language that I'm doing. Can I adapt the exercises or structure or just use it as a guide?
Some schools really have prescribed textbook and they're really rigid about their books, really rigid. They want you to use that book. So you need to, as I always say, it's very difficult to be a student teacher because you walk into another teacher's classroom and you actually have to follow what they are doing. So if your teacher wants you to use that book, then use it to the best of your ability, but add to the book to make it your own. Because remember, you have to develop your own teaching style as well, right? Some mentor teachers will allow you a lot of freedom. They will say to you, wonderful, come teach, get your own style, do your thing. Whereas other mentor teachers will tell you, you will do what I do. You will model what I do. Because this is the only way you teach. Then in a way, you're a little bit restricted. But then what you need to do is, and I'm sure that those teachers have a reason why they do that. Maybe it's the type of learners. Maybe the principal told them this is the way you have to teach. That's why I said every school is different. But what you need to do is if you, that's why I always say, step outside your mentor's class and go and observe other teachers as well, because that will really help you a lot to learn about people's teaching styles and classroom management. The more exposure you get to everything in the school, the more you will develop. I hope I answered your question. Just to finish off, I wish you a wonderful afternoon, and it's very nice to see all of you, and I'm sure all the other PGCE students elsewhere in the country. I hope that you've all learned something, or at least if it's just something small that you can take forward into your lesson plan. Thank you.